The rumbling. It's undoubtedly one of the most destructive single fictional disasters ever portrayed in, at least I'd say, animated media. I mean, there's probably some more that aren't coming to mind right off the top of my head right now. But I'd say it's definitely up there. The scale and the speed of the rumbling seemed unstoppable or inescapable to many of the show's characters, and it was. The militaries of Attack on Titan's version of Earth, despite being capable of killing individual Titans, were completely outmatched by the rumbling, and were annihilated, as was 80% of humanity, in a matter of days. The rumbling seems to be an unstoppable force, and at first glance, I would have to agree, and many who watch or have watched the show Attack on Titan believe that the rumbling would have similar success, or at least would have similar success in the real world against our world's modern militaries. That is not the case. In this series of videos, I'm going to be covering how each branch of a modern military can be employed to hold off the rumbling, and then I'm going to be covering how these branches could hypothetically work together to defeat the rumbling without the use of nuclear weapons. In this video, I'm going to be covering how I believe that ground forces can effectively beat back the rumbling. That is, armored vehicles, artillery, and even infantry. Back when I finished Attack on Titan, which I really enjoyed the show, by the way. If you haven't watched it before, go watch it. It's absolute cinema. Being the slightly autistic military buff that I am, I immediately went to YouTube and started looking for modern military versus rumbling videos, and I'm gonna be real with y'all, a lot of the stuff that I found was a bit like, a lot of the videos were shallow. I feel like some of them incorrectly assumed that the rumbling would win. Others weren't as well researched. Some were a combination of the two. And all of them slept on infantry. And in this modern era of guided missiles and drones, I believe that infantry units stand just as much of a chance at doing damage to the rumbling as any other part of a modern military. I mean, nobody's going to look at a wall titan and then looks at a squad of infantry with a couple of rocket launchers and rifles and is like, yeah, I'm gonna take those army guys. They've totally got this in the bag, right? But I mean, nowadays, infantry units are so much more than just guys running around with assault rifles. They are much more deadly than popularly believed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and state the obvious here. Obviously, a rifleman is going to be unable to do jack against a wall titan. I mean, it's common knowledge that titan flesh is much less dense than human flesh. And, I mean, hypothetically, a rifleman could land a lucky... Like, if he was somehow suspended a couple hundred feet above the back of a wall titan's neck, he could, land a lucky hit and kill the mate, but, that's not going to happen. However, as I said, infantry units aren't just guys with guns. Infantry units are also often equipped with what are called anti-tank guided missiles. Now, as much as I would like to ramble about the tons of different varieties of anti-tank guided missiles, that's not why I'm here. But what I can tell you today is that an anti-tank guided missile would easily be able to take down a wall titan. Now, let me elaborate. Anti-tank guided missiles carry what is called a heat or high explosive anti-tank warhead. And these warheads are engineered to punch through literal feet of steel armor or the heavy composite armor that equips most modern main battle tanks today. How these warheads function is they use what is called a shaped charge, which penetrates armor by focusing the missile's explosion into one point, which creates a jet of superheated gases and molten metal, which is usually copper if I recall correctly, that can kill tanks and certainly kill a wall titan. I'm sure you're wondering, how on earth am I so certain that an ATGM could do the damage that's needed to take down one of these wall titans? Now, back in the old days, tanks used to use regular old steel armor, and this heavy steel armor was rendered pretty much obsolete by heat ammunition. Plain steel armor is ineffective against heat warheads because it relies on its thickness and hardness to stop projectiles, and the focused metal jet from a heat charge punches right through that. Titan flesh, we already know that Titan flesh is much less dense than human flesh, and as a result, Titans are much lighter than a creature of their size should be, and hence are able to move a lot faster, as is seen in Attack on Titan. In fact, a Titan's biological makeup is reported to be only 10% as dense as a human's, as it lacks a lot of the water that makes up human tissue. A Titan's estimated density is around 100 to 300 kilograms per cubic meter, which, when compared to the density of steel, which is 7,850 kilograms per cubic meter, it might as well be wet tissue paper when going up against an anti-tank guided missile. Due to the size of the rumbling, anti-tank guided missile teams will have no choice but to engage the Wall Titans from the front. They will have to hit the Titans on the front of the neck and hope that the post-penetration effects of the shaped charge take care of the Titan's nape. The Wall Titan's neck thickness is generally around 4 meters, or 13.12 feet. The only ATGM that I think that, say, the US Army's infantry units have that could accurately target the Titan in the neck is the TOW missile, or why am I drawing a blank on this? I literally know this. Tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missile. Now, I'm pretty sure they're not wire-guided anymore. They use a different type of guidance system now that it's not the 1970s anymore. But, let me see, let me pull up my notes. Any case, the TOW-2A, which is probably the most numerous in service with the US Army, can punch through 3 feet of solid steel, and the older TOW and ITOW missiles can punch through about 2 feet of steel. Titan flesh, and this is the lowest estimate mind you, being 26 times less dense than steel, should not hold up very well against an ATGM. In fact, due to the disparity in density as the jet of molten metal and superheated gases travel through the neck of the Titan, it should not only bore a large hole through the neck, but also cause extensive damage to any tissue surrounding the hole, at least for a couple of feet. The exit wound should be a lot bigger than the entry wound, especially if the Titan's bones, like say the neck bones, were in the way, as harder tissue and bone should cause what is called spalling if caught in the blast. If the shockwave from the focused explosion doesn't immediately turn all tissue in its immediate vicinity, including the nape, into jelly, the heat jet and the surrounding damage will. I'm sorry for all that rambling on anti-tank missiles, but now that I've gotten my hypothesis for what happens when a heat warhead hits a Titan's neck, I shouldn't have to yap about that like in future videos, which is probably for the best. Any case, another type of weapon that infantry can use against the Wall Titans would be drones. And there are a lot of different types of drones that can be used as well. However, the ones that would be the most effective, and the only ones I'm going to yap about today, are FPV drones, or first-person view drones, and loitering munitions. FPV drones would be harder to hit the Wall Titans with, as they're a lot harder to control, but they can carry both heat and high explosive warheads, so all an FPV drone would need to do is hit the back of a Wall Titan's neck close enough to the nape to kill it. FPV drones, due to the intense heat of the Titans, would suffer from the winds and updrafts caused by the intense heat. And they would also suffer from, the heat potentially melting plastic components of the drones. So they'd be hard-pressed to actually land hits in the winds before the heat destroys the drones. But with how FPV drones would, at least in the case of some militaries, be on hand in large numbers, follow-up strikes and kills would not be a problem. Loitering munitions, on the other hand, are a lot more resilient against things like heat and wind, and often can carry larger payloads. They can also be launched from a longer distance. Loitering munitions like the Lancet and Switchblade would be super effective against Wall Titan, especially due to how accurate they are and could target the napes of Titans very easily. Of course, I'm basing my theories on how heat and high explosive munitions would be able to kill Wall Titans based on purely off of a couple scenes from the Attack on Titan show, namely when Hanji, RIP. By the way, if you're watching this video and haven't watched the show, you should, unless you're not planning on watching the show ever, stop watching. There will be spoilers. Now that we've covered how I believe that infantry units would be able to deal with Titans, I feel like it's worth mentioning that all of my theories are based off of a couple scenes from the show. It was shown that high explosive rounds from the combined fleet's battleships and armored cruisers were able to deal substantial damage and kill a couple of Wall Titans, meaning that high explosive rounds should be effective. Additionally, during one of the last episodes of Attack on Titan, Hanji Zoe sacrificed herself to take down several Wall Titans using both her swords and her thunder spears, which Thunder Spears are rudimentary handheld anti-armor rockets, which use a form of semi-armored piercing warhead to do damage rather than a shaped charge like that of a anti-tank guided missile. This scene is important to my theory for several reasons, one of which is that it proves that smaller explosive charges, if put accurately on target, can kill wall titans, which means that stuff like man-portable anti-tank systems, anti-tank guided missiles, or rockets launched from attack aircraft and helicopters are all capable of dealing damage to and killing wall titans with relative ease. Now, my next little yap session is going to be a bit of a stretch, so you'll have to bear with me, but I feel it's worth mentioning that infantry will usually be accompanied by lots of armored vehicles, many of which are capable of taking down a wall titan. I'll touch on infantry fighting vehicles later, but most armored vehicles, like MRAPs, Humvees, armored personnel carriers, at least in the case of the United States military, are equipped with a heavy machine gun like the Browning M2. In Attack on Titan, the Empire of Marley developed an anti-Titan rifle, which is identical to a real-life weapon, the PTRD-41 anti-tank rifle. While the M2 is unable to match the penetration of the PTRD, albeit not by much, and while neither the anti-Titan rifle nor the M2 are capable of downing a Titan from the front with a single shot, at least down a wall Titan, multiple vehicles with Brownings hosing down a Titan's neck or hitting a wall Titan's nape from the back should be able to kill a Titan. An M2's 50 cal round is very powerful and hypothetically able to punch through a couple feet of Titan flesh at long range. About 30 seconds of sustained fire from multiple vehicles or infantry-operated machine guns should be able to overwhelm regeneration, cause massive damage, and eventually kill a wall titan. Of course, this should be a last-ditch effort, as other vehicles are much more suited to killing wall titans. Now, modern militaries possess a lot of different kinds of vehicles that are capable of taking down wall titans. Tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and even self-propelled guns, in fact, especially self-propelled guns in some situations, are capable of efficiently taking down wall titans en masse from long range. A lot of the videos I've seen that hit modern militaries against the rumbling completely ignore ground vehicles and armored vehicles entirely, and as a lover of all things with tracks and a gun, I am not going to stand for this. Infantry fighting vehicles, or IFVs, are responsible for shuttling mechanized infantry units into battle and supporting them once infantry dismounts. Most IFVs are armed with an autocannon and anti-tank guided missiles, both of which will prove to be very effective against Titans. Let's take the M2 Bradley, for instance. It's one of the most combat-proven IFVs in the world. Its 25mm Bushmaster autocannon can fire high explosive and armor-piercing ammunition, both of which are capable of killing Titans depending on the situation. The armor-piercing discarding sabot and armor-piercing thin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds that the Bushmaster fires can generally pierce through about 1 to 2 meters of Titan flesh, depending on the range, and sustained fire from a Bushmaster should be able to overwhelm regeneration and punch through the Titan's neck, destroying the nape with fragments of bone as well as the depleted uranium that is found in much of the Bushmaster's ammunition. Additionally, the Bradley is able to fire TOW anti-tank guided missiles, which are more than capable of taking down Titans at really long range, as I've already touched on. Not all IFVs are created equal. For instance, the Swedish CV-90 lacks an anti-tank guided missile altogether. However, it has a much larger Bofors 40mm autocannon, which can fire both semi-armored piercing ammunition, high explosive ammunition, and armored piercing thin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, which should, with a well-placed shot, be able to punch all the way through to the nape. Others, like the BMP-2, are older and lack the accuracy and penetration power to land good hits at range. What I'm saying is that different kinds of IFVs will have different amounts of success against wall titans. However, IFVs rarely operate without the support of an armored vehicle that is perfectly suited for slaughtering wall titans en masse. The tank. I love tanks. Some of you probably know me in real life and are aware of this fact, but I do not say that tanks can slaughter wall titans lightly, and I assure you, I'm very much correct. Allow me to elaborate. First and foremost, tanks have really big guns. At least most of them do. Most modern main battle tanks can fire high explosive anti-tank ammunition as well as armor-piercing ammunition, Some tanks can even fire anti-tank guided missiles. The latest model of the M829 depleted uranium armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot round from an M1 Abrams can punch through more than a meter of solid steel, and the main gun rounds of even older tanks are more than enough to blast through the neck of a Titan, meaning that older T-72s, M60s, and Leopard 1s are all very capable of dealing with Titans. However, a hit is needed to kill a Titan, so how capable are tanks at hitting Titans accurately? Very capable. APFSDS rounds travel at extremely... APFSDS rounds travel extremely fast and extremely far. When combined with fire control systems, stabilization systems, and advanced optics that most modern main battle tanks have, gunners will certainly be able to drop absolute dimes right through the necks of Titans. The post-penetration effects of an armor-piercing dart traveling at such a high speed will be devastating. The shrapnel and pressure wave alone will cause what is called hydraulic shock incavitation. As the massive pressure wave impacts the soft tissue, it blows it apart. This is because the weight and speed of the projectile cause it to have immense kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy's gotta go somewhere. A well-placed AP round will probably leave a gaping 2-foot wide hole where the spinal column and nape were, and at ranges under 2 miles, the slightly slower, high explosive and heat rounds will be just as easy to land, and will be just as effective as an anti-tank guided missile. The M1 Abrams, for instance, fires 3 general types of ammunition that could be effective against Titans. The Abrams can fire heat, which is just a fancy programmable heat round, and the legendary M829 Silver Bullet, which is made out of highly pyrophoric depleted uranium. Older tanks don't have the fire control systems that newer ones have, and will be less accurate as a result, but they will still be able to land kill shots most of the time. Now, almost every modern military versus rumbling video I've seen covers artillery, simply because artillery is one of the few weapons that we see pitted against the rumbling and attack on Titan. It is often broken down into just the number of guns, and self-propelled and rocket artillery are often completely ignored, likely due to oversight by the people making the videos. And this is dumb, because when 400,000 giants show up off your coast, every gun counts. Artillery pieces are usually used for indirect fire, which is a method of firing a weapon where the shooter does not have a direct line of sight to the target. Instead, artillery is aimed using calculations, coordinates, and external observers, such as spotters and especially nowadays, drones. Though saturating the rumbling from range with artillery might be somewhat effective, and could temporarily immobilize or even kill a wall Titan with a lucky shot, without specialized ammunition, regular artillery will be hard-pressed to get any kills with indirect fire. Direct fire, on the other hand, is not something that regular towed artillery pieces are generally equipped for. GPS-guided rounds, like the M982 Excalibur, are not suited for hitting moving targets, so the only option, besides firing standard ammunition and praying for a hit, is cluster ammunition. For instance, most Western artillery pieces are capable of firing a type of ammunition called a DPICM, or Dual-Purpose Improved Conventional Munition. DPICM rounds are packed with small-shaped and explosive charges. While this is not the best method for taking down wall Titans, it could help. Indeed, any indirect fire that cannot be guided directly into the head or neck area of a wall Titan is unlikely to score many kills, so cluster rounds are the best shot to score kills, as they scatter explosive and armor-piercing charges across a battlefield. Rocket artillery can also be used to fire cluster warheads. Self-propelled guns, on the other hand, can be equipped for direct fire. Though not designed to be for direct fire, self-propelled guns often have rangefinders, fire control systems, gun sights, and sometimes even stabilization. Additionally, they can elevate really high due to their need to hit targets at long range, which can help with engaging Titans that get too close. A 155 high explosive round to anywhere in the neck or head region will destroy the nape with shrapnel or the concussive force of the blast. However, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, as well as air-mobile and mechanized infantry equipped with anti-tank guided missiles, should be the first choice when engaging Titans directly on the ground. Self-propelled and towed artillery should only be committed to attack Titans when they are adequately protected or when there is no other choice. Welp, that is all I've got, at least for this video. The next video is going to be a bit shorter, as I'm going to be touching on how navies could be used to potentially attack the rumbling. The video should be shorter, as if I'm being honest with y'all, there's a little bit less that navies can do. In any case, thank you for watching. I put a lot of work into this, so it means a lot that anyone is watching it. Hopefully the quality is better next time. I'm low-key recording the voiceover on a laptop, so I don't really, I'm not really good with voiceovers either, so I don't really know what I'm doing, but thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.